Good morning everybody, Col here. Well, we're getting towards the pointy end of our box. We're starting to do all the little things around the box that make it, just a little bit jazzy, a little bit smart. So today is going to be, we're going to have two tasks today. The first task is we're going to fit or drill the lock in here. I better turn the right camera on. So we're going to drill for the lock in there. So we're going to do that today. And the other thing you're going to do today, if you have a look at the box, it's quite large. I want to put an escutcheon plate on the front of the box. So it'll go about there somewhere. And this is my escutcheon plate. You can see it's quite tiny. It's not very big at all. So it's only 16 millimetres across. So when you put it on there, I think my big pudgy fingers cover it all, it tends to sort of disappear into the front of the box, and it's so small. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a support for that escutcheon plate. Now that support is going to look a bit like that. You can see that it's going to fit into there, and my escutcheon plate fits in the middle of it. Okay, so we're going to make one of those. Now that's all rounded over, and that rounding over matches the rounding over on the edges of there. It matches the rounding over on the top of there. It also will stick out a little bit, which matches my 3D dovetails. Okay, so that's going to fit on there, and as you can see, it sort of stands out a little bit more. Okay, so when you get it just adds a little bit more. Now the material that I'm using for that is exactly the same as the material on the top of the box. As you can see, it's a bit fiddly. So we're going to do that today. We're going to go over to the lathe and have a little play with that. But first of all, what we have to do is we have to fit the lock. Now the lock, and the one I'm using is a Crawford lock. So it needs to be fitted into there. Last week we cut the rebate for the top of the lock. Now to check to see that I had the right depth, what I did is I turned it upside down, fitted it into the hole, and just made sure I was flush on the top. Okay, so that was the easiest way to do it. Now all I need to do is rebate straight into there. Now there's a number of different ways you can do that. So and I'll talk about those in a minute, but there's a couple of other things that I wanted to focus on, or not focus on, but I wanted to make mention of. Last week there were some comments on the chat that I didn't address, and I need to address those before we go too much further. So Dallas asked about swirls with sanding machines and sanders. All of the sanders, orbital sanders, will give you swirls because of the nature in which they work. It depends on how you use it and the type of material you use, or the type of sandpaper that you use on it. If you log on to Fixit's website, he uses quite a large sander, and you'll find that it's fairly aggressive, and when you're getting into aggressive sanding, you're going to be using coarse sandpaper, so you're going to get swirls. It's no different to using a piece of 100 grit paper and sanding with the grain. You're still going to have marks on there, just not swirls. They're going to be scratch marks that go along it. So the idea is to remove them as you go through the grades of sandpaper. Now, whether you're using an orbital sander or you're using a hand sanding, and often I've seen people who will sand in a circular motion and they'll get exactly the same techniques, same scratches as somebody who's using an orbital sander. So the sanding is a technique where you need to sort of take a little bit of care in it and keep checking it. You can remove all those swirl marks if they do occur, just by reducing your sandpaper and so forth. So it's quite easy to do that, and you pick and choose the sander that suits the work that you're doing and the skill level that you're at. So by all means, go with orbital sanders, but just be careful how you use it. You don't need to put a whole lot of pressure on it. You don't need to sort of, it's a mechanical thing and it's designed to do that, so a light pressure will always give you a good result as well. If you have to sand a lot off, well then obviously you've got to go to a thicknesser or somewhere else, another tool to plane the gear off. Sanding won't give you a perfect result if you're trying to thickness a piece of material down. So you need to go to a tool that has that capability. So that was that. The next one was there was discussion about measuring and using a ruler and setting up with little blocks and shims and various other tools to get small measurements on the ruler. And this is all based around when I was measuring up to cut these rebates. The thing there is that all of my boxes, and this is why I do it this way with the ruler, all of my boxes are bespoke boxes. So the length of the box is always different, pretty much all the time. I rarely make boxes exactly the same. If you look behind here, I've got a whole heap of boxes that I'm in the process of making. They're not all the same size. They all look the same, but they're not all the same size. So therefore you need to use the ruler, because if you start using a shim and you've got different sizes, you're going to get different outcome at the end of it. So different thickness materials, different lengths, and because I'm doing an individual box, this is why I use a ruler. Okay, so and quite rightly, shims and things do work, little blocks. You'll notice that when I'm doing the distances of cuts from the router bit, of course, you can see I've got a whole heap of little measuring blocks that I actually use for doing my measurements. They're all marked, they're all got different measurements on them, and they are for that purpose of actually setting up and making it a little easier to sort of adjust your router bit to the size you're doing. But then again, that's only for specific stuff. So use your rulers. I always say, and I've always said right from the word go, the more times you use your ruler, the more times you're going to make a mistake. So sort of limiting how many times you use it. But unfortunately, with things like this, where you've got one of, you're going to have to use the ruler every now and then. So I hope that answers that question. As for magnets, using magnets as stops, that's fine if you have a steel fence. My fences are wooden and magnets don't work on there unless I build something into the fence where I can put a magnet and use it as a stop. To me, that's a little bit over the top, but anyway, it's something we do. So yeah, so have a little think about that. Now, the other thing that I did was glue up. I said to you last week that I would glue the lid together. Now, I don't have any pictures of gluing it up, but this is what the lid looks like now. As you can see, it's glued in place, and I've got a really nice set inside there, and you can actually see that it looks nice and even because of where the corners of the butterflies actually meet in the corner. And once I put a finish on there, that's going to highlight actually the corner of the piece. I put a coat of finish on there just to seal it, to hold it. So it will get another light sand later down the track, but and then 2 or 3 more coats of finish. So that's what's going to happen to it. So that was the lid, and as you can see, it fits on here quite nicely. So it fits there nicely. I'm not trying to sort of rush it. I don't want to rush this thing and make it blunder. So the box is going to look quite good, particularly when we get our little keeper on it. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like there. All right, drilling. Ooh. Be careful I don't break something. Okay, now, drilling. So over to my drill press. Now, with drilling, the thing about drilling is you need to make sure that every time you use the drill, every time you drill it, drill a hole, you need to make sure that everything is stable. Okay, so I'll show you something that I did, but before I do that, the drill bit that I'm going to use is a brad point bit. It's got a point on the end of it, and I'll show you in a sec. One of the problems I found with the brad point bits was they're hard to find. Now, here in Coffs Harbour, we have a big green store, we've got a big red store, we've got a big blue store. None of them carry brad point bits. And I thought, what the? They're wooden. That's what they told me. They're for woodwork. So I went to my favourite Carbotech store and had a look at their site, and they have them on the thing. So there's a link down below to Carbotech. If you're looking for brad point bits, by all means, you know, follow up with Carbotech, give the guys a ring and a call, or order them online, and you can get them. You know, they're relatively cheap, but they are very, very good for this task that we're going to do today. So let me go to the other camera. So what I've done, I've had to make another bench, another top for my table, my drilling table, because of the size of the box that's going on it. Now, it has to be a big surface like that, because when you look under the box, you can see that I'm only touching 4 points of the bench, and I need to have that sitting like so. Right? So it sits quite nicely. Now, the other thing that I've done is on my backboard, I've screwed on a piece of material which is the same thickness as the distance from the outside of there to the inside of that piece of timber there, so that I've got something solid to push up against. Okay, and then we're going to cramp it in place. So that's a setup that I had to do, and I'm going to put a cramp on there and hold that in place. Now, one of the things that we have to do is the distance from, I just got to get my lock, just a sec, I'll find it. I know it's here somewhere. The distance on the lock from the top to the bottom is 25 millimetres. Okay, so that's from the top there. The hole that we're going to drill, we're starting at the bottom underneath it. So that's what's going to happen when we look over here and we look into there. That's where that's going to start. So what I'm doing is I'm measuring from the top of the lock to the bottom and a little bit more. Okay, so with my brad point bit, you can see that looks like that. Okay, you can see it very pointy. What I'm doing is I'm measuring from the shoulder of the brad point bit, and I've got a mark here that I've put on here, which is 25 millimetres from that shoulder to there. So that's, I could sit that in there and I could drill down to the mark, but it's a bit hard to see when it's spinning, so a little piece of tape set on the mark like so, and all I'm going to do is just make this little flap that sits out. Okay, so that's my flap, and that's the depth I'm going to cut. So what's going to happen is I will drill down until that flap touches the top of the box, like so. So that's going to happen there. Right, I'll set this up. Just shift the box out of the way, otherwise I'll damage something. Okay, just test it. Spinning true. And now for the setup. Now I've already set it so that it's drilling in the middle of my piece of timber. That was the idea of that little backing board on the back of it. So now, just a matter of drilling the holes. Now, I'm just going to overlap a tiny little bit from the edge. Put myself a clamp on there. Okay, so I like to make sure that it's clamped in place every time I make it a cut. So 25 mil. Clear it. Touches. Nice, right in the centre. Now I'm going to do the other end so that I've got two ends to work to. So what I have there is I've got a hole at both ends. Okay, so that gives me my end points. Now it's just a matter of drilling the stuff out of the middle. Now you can overlap the hole a tiny little bit. So be careful how you go about this, because if you overlap too much, what it will do is will push the drill bit sideways, and that will cause inaccuracy. So just make sure that you've got take it slowly, you don't need to rush. You can see that when the little tag gets down, it actually starts brushing the sawdust away. You know you've got to the right depth. Move along a little bit. A little bit more. Now I could have used a router bit. It's not far enough. I could have used a router bit and done it on the router. That takes a little bit more skill and it takes a lot more control. Like I say, take your time with this, don't rush it. If you rush it, you're going to make an error. This is going to be a tricky little one. It's right in the middle. It's a very small amount of material to work with here. As you can see, slowly does it. The fact that I'm using a brad point bit, because it's got a point on it, will keep tracking in a straight line when it drills down. Okay, let's go back to the bench. Okay, as you can see now, I've got a bit of sawdust in there. Now what I want to do now is I want to clear out everything that's in that hole, in that trench. Now I've got this fancy little set of chisels, and it's always a good idea to have at least a reasonably good quality set of chisels. Now I picked these up at one of the timber working with wood shows years ago, and from Jim Davies, but I always keep them in pristine condition. You can see that the blades are really well kept, and it's always a good idea to keep them like that so that when we're using them, nice and sharp. So it's just a matter of cleaning out and using the chisel like so. Now I resist the temptation to get the mallet out and hit it with a mallet. Now the timber's relatively soft. It's not. I'm going to be turning this over every 5 minutes just to get the sawdust out of it. I could get the air duster into it, but that's going to blow it everywhere. I'll find another tool here somewhere, small ruler maybe. One of the problems I've found is it's extremely difficult to get a small chisel that will actually fit into a 6mm groove. Right? Now this one sort of fits, but it's just that little bit too wide. So I need something actually a little bit smaller in there. So I've got a little bit of leeway when I'm using it. So have a look around. I'm not sure if the big green sheds carry those sorts of things. Again, the problem we have here in Coffs Harbour is that we don't have lots of specialist tool makers or tool people that carry tools. You have to go to the bigger cities for all of that sort of stuff. But we do have some stuff. And like I say, shopping online is a breeze nowadays. So. Okay, so all we're going to do now is just very carefully trim off the excess of those holes. Like I say, I resist the temptation of actually getting the chisel out, or the mallet, sorry, and a bigger chisel. They cut. When you look after your chisels and look after your tools, you'll find that they always work for you. Coming out nicely. I'll just find my lock again. So the lock has to fit in that groove. Look at that, nice and snug, beautiful, nice fit. What I have to do now is just clear all the material out. Like I said, should get the air duster onto it and give it a blowout, but I don't want to spread it all over the place. Could get a vacuum cleaner onto it too, I suppose. Anybody got any bright ideas on how to clear that out quickly? That's coming up nicely. Everything will fit. You'll also notice that I haven't screwed too many pieces on either. I sort of try to do that as the last resort, screwing bits and pieces together. Okay, we're looking good now. Okay, so just a little bit more there. Let's up this end. Just make sure that you cut it evenly so that the lock doesn't twist out of shape or twist offline. And that's pretty good. Still got a bit of sawdust in there. Aussie, I probably could do that, but it means setting things up again, and this is, quite frankly, is okay. It's just a matter of getting the sawdust out and the excess out. So it doesn't matter if it's a little bit rough inside there, because you're not going to see the lock anyway. You're going to see that cavity anyway. And there's just a little bit more down the bottom. Just pushing it over to the side a little bit. So I'll take a little bit out of here. When you're at the pointy end of doing these things here, this is where all the fun is, and where taking your time brings you the best result. A little bit in the bottom there, it's just so as you can see, that's the technique that we're going to use. Now, I'm going to fit it, but I'm not going to screw it in place, because I want to get on to making the... There we go. Okay, so there's something at this end that's stopping it. Must be a bit of sawdust in there. There is. That's it. Okay, we're not going to push that down. It'll go in, that's not a problem. It just needs to be pushed down. I've got it down flush on this end, okay? But I'm not going to push that down because it's really difficult to get it out. So I want to keep it in there. I want to be able to get it out later. So that is your technique of fitting that. So it will go in. As you can see, if I put it in that end, you can see that it'll fit in. So it goes straight in. So I'm not going to push it. I don't want to push it down too far. Now I have got it stuck. I might need to just dress that up a little bit. So basically that's the technique. Now, the the distance, I don't know why I put that in there, the distance for making the size, to give you a size for our escutcheon keeper, it's got to sit like that. Okay. So the distance to the middle of the keyhole is where we measure from, and we have to measure from the bottom. Okay, so that's 15 millimeters to the middle. Okay, so 15 and 15 is 30. Okay, so our little piece of material has to be 30 millimeters. Now, what we do then, find yourself a piece of material. I'm using a piece from a piece of this material, right? The red Banksia, and I have a 30 millimeter hole saw. Now, the 30 millimeter hole saw, when you buy them, you'll see that it comes like that, right? So that just screws onto there. You don't do it up tight, and then just push the stop, and that will lock into the slots in the side of the hole saw. And then when you drill the, whoop, drop that. When you drill the hole, you can remove that and replace it with a bigger one or a smaller one, whatever you're working with. Now, I've taken the grub screw out of here because I don't want the drill bit in the middle, because I don't want a hole drilled in my piece of gear. I don't want a hole drilled in here just yet. I want to do that on the lathe. So cut yourself some pieces of 30 mil, because that's what's going to go onto there. All right. Now, what we need to do now is we've got to go over to the lathe and just give Pammy a couple of secs to shift the camera. And we'll get ourselves over there. You're right there. Whoop. And so what I have is I've cut half a dozen of these little pieces, little 30 millimeter plugs, basically. So I've got those all ready to go. So what I'm going to do is we'll go over to the lathe and I'll get started and we'll make those. Now I need to take our little escutcheon plate. I've got that there. Okay, let's have a look and see what we've got. There you go. You can see that I've set up the lathe already. I've got a blank on the end of the lathe, and that blank is I'm going to glue to that. So, little different. These are the little plugs. You can see I've got a couple of them made. So they're just quite nice. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to hot melt glue to the end of my blank. So just shift the tail stop. I'll bring this up. And I have a hot melt glue gun. That's this little gadget here. Just got to wait for it to warm up a little bit. It's getting warm. And then I'm going to put a little bit of glue on across here, just a couple little cross bits, and glue that straight to there. All right. So that'll only take a couple of seconds. Just got to get this to glue up. I'm just waiting for the glue gun to heat up. You can use anything you like to do this one. You can heat it up. You can glue it on with just a piece of super glue, or you can cut yourself a little rebate in there and pressure fit into there. I find this way does the work really good. Here we go. So as you can see, not very much, just a little cross. That's all I need. Glue that onto there. And then I'll just wind my tailstock up and I'll just give it a push just to flatten it onto there. Now I'm not too concerned if it's not in centre, but what I want is I want it to dry there. It doesn't take very long to cool off. Okay. Shift my tailstock. And that's quite solid on there now. It's just a matter of turning. Shift my tailstock out of the way so I don't bash my elbow. So all I'm going to do now is just turn that flat. So the first thing I'm going to do is just take the edge off. Now I'm using just a small spindle gouge. So this is what my spindle gouge looks like. So I'm just using that. I'm going to just take the edge off. Got to keep as much diameter as possible. Okay. Just turn it down to the right thickness. That's really close, Penny. Okay, so round it over, like so. I need a flat face across the front. Okay, so that's all you need to do, and then a little bit of sandpaper. So if you just back tailstock off. Just using a little piece of 240. Give him my shape. Okay. Get that back to a bit of 400. Okay, so we're at that stage there now. So that's given me my shape. Just turn that off. So now I have my shape. Now what I need to do is I need to start drilling my holes. All right. Now just come in on this here, Penny. The little escutcheon plate is 16 millimetres in diameter, and I have a 16 millimetre Forstner bit. Now I resisted using the sawtooth one. This one here is quite good because it's got sharp edges on each side of it. The sawtooth one tends to be a bit more vigorous, and it does tend to tear, particularly when you're working with something so small. So to drill that out, I'll fit that into my chuck, slide that up to there. Back a little bit. And if I just turn the handle, I can just drill a little hole. Just need to keep checking it. I don't want to go too deep. If you do go too deep, it doesn't really matter because you can always sand the end off, but let me see how that fits. It's still got to go a little bit deeper. It's not quite deep enough. And on again. so that's just a little bit more, I think. It's just sticking out a little bit. Should do it. Okay. There we go. Nicely done. Okay, now what I need to do is I need to drill a hole that's as big as the keyhole. So again, we change up, and now we're using a 9mm brad point bit. All I'm going to do is drill all the way through with that one. Drill all the way through. A bit smoky. Okay, so now I have that there. There's a light sand, a bit of 400. Like so. I'll just shift this drill bit before I poke my elbow out. A little bit of 1000 grit. Just want to get it nice and smooth. Got to be careful because if you get it hot, it'll melt the glue and it'll come off. Which is pretty much what it's just done. I would normally part that off, but because it got hot, I was able to peel it off. So I just clean off that glue. Okay, so now I have my little escutcheon plate keeper. Okay, so there's a bit of glue in there, so it's just got to clean it out. Okay, so that's what it's going to look like. So quite nice. Okay, back to our bench. Now I can use that for another one now. Okay, so that was quite an easy little task. I'm going to use the one that I made earlier. So what's going to happen now is we need to drill a hole for where that fits. Okay, so we've got to drill the hole to go into there. Now what I need to do is I need to make sure that it's at the right size, the right distance to get that hole drilled. Just big enough to put the key in. So we'll sit that up here. Now I've got everything marked. If you can come into there, You can see that I've got everything marked here where the ends of the lock. So it's going to sit there. About there somewhere. So when it's in there, the distance that I have from there to there, I need to make sure that I've got the correct distance. So I'm going to measure from the top. So to the centre of the key is 17mm to the centre. That's between the top of the key. So I've got 17mm there. So all I need to do is measure my centre at 17mm from my centre line. That's it. Haven't got a pencil. Gosh. So there's my 17 millimetres, right there, and I need to make sure that I've got it in the centre. So again, shift some of this stuff. Now when you drill this hole, if you're going to line the inside of the box, you can drill the hole all the way through because it's going to be covered anyway. If you're not going to, you don't have a lot of room to work with, and you need to be very, very careful when you drill the hole. So if you look at this, you can see that there's not very much room between the inside edge of that and the outside edge of there. There's not a lot of room. So you need to be really, really careful. And so you need to make sure that you're in exactly the right spot as well, so that when you do put the key in, it actually goes through into the right place, or when you put the lock in place, you're going to be in the hole for the lock. Okay, so I'm just going to give it a double check before I actually drill. That is my centre mark. And I'm going to use a 9mm drill brad point bit, so I'll just have to go to the lathe and get that. The drill bit that's on the top of the lathe.